He was given 2 years to live. He lived 55 more. And in those 55 years, he changed how the entire human species understands the cosmos. That's the story of Stephen Hawking. But the part that most people skip over, the part I find most extraordinary, is not the wheelchair, not the synthesized voice, not the celebrity. It's what happened in the 18 months right after the diagnosis. Because that's where the real transformation occurred. That's where a coasting, directionless young man became one of the most ferociously driven scientists who ever lived. Let's go back to Oxford, 1959. Hawking arrives on a scholarship, 17 years old, studying physics. And by every account, he is brilliant. Genuinely, almost effortlessly brilliant. His tutor at University College, Robert Berman, later said that Hawking stood apart from his peers intellectually in a way that was immediately obvious. And yet, here's the thing that gets me every time. He did almost nothing with it. He estimated, by his own admission, that he studied approximately 1 hour per day at Oxford. 1 hour. He found the work too easy, too unchallenging, too slow for what his mind could do. He coasted. He socialized. He joined the rowing club as a coxswain. He was, in his own words, bored. He graduates in 1962, moves to Cambridge to begin his PhD under Dennis Sciama, and then, right at the moment when his real intellectual life should be launching, everything stops. In 1963, at 21 years old, Stephen Hawking is diagnosed with motor neuron disease, ALS. The doctors tell him he has approximately 2 years to live. 2 years. He is 21 years old. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because I think it's easy to read a sentence like that and move past it. But think about what that actually means. You are at the very beginning of your life. You have just started your PhD. You are about to do the work you were born to do, and someone tells you it's already over. He fell apart. He stopped working almost entirely. He drank. He saw no point in continuing his research. Why finish a PhD you won't live to use? His biographers describe this period as one of genuine despair and near total withdrawal. The music he loved blared from his room. The work sat untouched. But then something shifted. And this is the part of the story I keep coming back to. He later described having a dream during this period. A dream that he was going to be executed. And he woke up from it with a sudden, almost visceral realization. There were things he still wanted to do. The dream made it real, in a way the diagnosis somehow hadn't. He said, "When you are faced with the possibility of an early death, it makes you realize that life is worth living, and that there are lots of things you want to do." That's from his memoir. And I love that quote, because it sounds simple, but it isn't simple at all. He's not saying he made peace with dying. He's saying the proximity of death revealed to him, for the first time, how much he actually wanted to live. And more than that, how much he wanted to work. There was also Jane Wilde. He met her right around the time of his diagnosis, and their relationship, their engagement in 1964, gave him, by his own account, a reason to push forward, to finish the PhD, to build something. He said she gave him the will to live. And so he returned to physics. Not reluctantly, not with resignation, with urgency. And here is where the transformation becomes permanent. Before the diagnosis, Hawking had infinite time, and he wasted it. After the diagnosis, he had almost no time, and that changed the entire psychological equation. Every hour that remained had to count. The coasting was over. The boredom was over. He later reflected on this with a clarity that I think is one of the most honest things he ever said about himself. My expectations were reduced to 0 when I was 21. Everything since then has been a bonus. Everything since then has been a bonus. That sentence, that is a complete philosophy of work and life packed into 11 words. What he's describing is a kind of psychological liberation. When you expect nothing, when the future has already been taken from you, every day you get back is pure surplus. You stop protecting time and start spending it. You stop waiting for the right moment because you understand, at a level most people never reach, that there is no later. Most people need urgency imposed on them from outside to perform at their peak. Hawking had the ultimate urgency handed to him at 21, and instead of being destroyed by it, which would have been completely understandable, he was ignited by it. He completed his PhD, he married Jane, he began collaborating with Roger Penrose on singularity theorems that would prove the Big Bang was a mathematical necessity. He was publishing original work, building a scientific reputation, becoming someone, all while his body was slowly being taken apart. The diagnosis didn't end Stephen Hawking's story. It started it. The man who existed before 1963, brilliant but drifting, that man might never have amounted to anything. The man who emerged from that despair, rebuilt by urgency and love and an absolute refusal to waste what remained. That man would go on to hold Isaac Newton's chair at Cambridge, discover that black holes are not black, and write a book about the origin of the universe that 100 million people would read. It began with being told he was dying. Everything else, every equation, every discovery, every impossible achievement that came after, was the bonus. So now you have to understand what this man actually did. Not the diagnosis, we've covered that. What came after, how he worked, what the inside of that life looked like. Because here's the thing that gets lost in the mythology. People know the wheelchair. People know the voice synthesizer. People know the pop culture icon who appeared on The Simpsons and sat across from Leonard on The Big Bang Theory. What they don't know is the mechanism, the actual daily reality of how one of the most complex bodies of theoretical work in the 20th century got produced by a man who couldn't hold a pen. At Oxford, by his own admission, Hawking studied roughly 1 hour a day. His tutor, Robert Berman, observed that he did the absolute minimum required and still stood apart from everyone else. He coasted. Brilliant, bored, and coasting. The diagnosis ended that permanently. After he came back from the despair, after Jane Wilde pulled him back toward a future, after the dream where he imagined being executed and woke up understanding he still had things he wanted to do, he returned to physics with a completely different psychological relationship to time. Every hour became load-bearing in a way it never had been before. And so the question becomes, what do you do when you can no longer write? When you can no longer stand at a blackboard? When eventually you can no longer even speak? You build a different kind of mind. Hawking developed techniques of mental visualization that colleagues described as almost incomprehensible to watch from the outside. He would hold entire equations in his head, complex topological structures. He would rotate them mentally, test them, manipulate them, the way a sculptor might turn a form in their hands, except there were no hands. His student Gary Gibbons noted that Hawking could solve problems in his head that other physicists needed pages of calculation to approach. They would watch him lie still for hours, appearing to do nothing, and then he would produce a conclusion that would have taken someone else a week to reach on paper. He was not overcoming a limitation. He was building a genuinely different cognitive architecture. And what he produced through that architecture is staggering. The singularity theorems with Roger Penrose, the mathematical proof that the Big Bang was not just a useful metaphor, but a necessary feature of general relativity. Then in 1974, at 32, the discovery that would attach his name permanently to the history of physics: Hawking radiation. The theoretical proof that black holes emit radiation, that they are not, in fact, perfectly black, that they lose energy, slowly, and eventually evaporate entirely. Black holes had been understood as the ultimate one-way door. Nothing goes in, nothing comes out. Hawking proved that wasn't quite right, and he proved it entirely inside his own mind, drawing on quantum mechanics and thermodynamics simultaneously, combining frameworks that weren't supposed to be combined yet. That same year, he was elected Fellow of the Royal Society. He was 32 years old and confined to a wheelchair. Then, in 1985, came the second catastrophe. He was in Geneva when he contracted pneumonia. He nearly died. The surgery that saved his life destroyed his voice permanently. After that, communication slowed to something that would have broken most people before they even tried to use it. He twitched a single cheek muscle to select words from a screen. As few as 15 words per minute. Think about that. 15 words per minute. Through that system, he wrote The Universe in a Nutshell. He wrote The Grand Design. He gave lectures by preparing text in advance. He supervised doctoral students. He traveled internationally. He continued submitting original research papers well into his 70s. And then there is A Brief History of Time. He began writing it in 1982. It was published in 1988. It stayed on the Sunday Times bestseller list for 237 weeks. A book about the origin of the universe, about singularities and imaginary time and the no-boundary proposal, read by 100 million people. Written by a man communicating through a cheek muscle. His no-boundary proposal with James Hartle argued that asking what existed before the Big Bang was a category error. Time itself began at the singularity. There is no before. It's like asking what is south of the South Pole. The question assumes a geography that doesn't exist. I love that framing. It doesn't say we don't know. It says the question itself is malformed. That is a different kind of intellectual courage. He supervised dozens of PhD students across his career. His final paper, on the multiverse and eternal inflation, was submitted just days before his death in March 2018 and published posthumously. 55 years after they told him he had 2 years to live. However difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at. It matters that you don't just give up. He said that. And then he lived it in a way that makes the words almost redundant. What did Stephen Hawking actually believe? About the universe, about us, about what it all means. That's where I want to end. Because the physics is extraordinary. But the philosophy underneath it, the way he saw existence itself, that's what I keep coming back to. His goal was not modest. He stated it plainly. Thank you for listening to the story of Stephen Hawking. If you'd like more stories like this, make sure